I've gone from Canon to Nikon to Sony. Which camera brand is the best? Is one better than the other? And why have I now made that switch? What's happening, everyone? Today is not going to be an in-depth review of each camera system. Instead, I want to give you my experience, tell you why I switched between each brand, and hopefully that's going to help you make up your own mind about which brand to choose. I'm going to start this off with a brief history of the cameras I've owned so that you can get an idea for why I choose the camera systems I do. So I started my career in the film industry. I didn't start as a photographer. I was what's called a second AC, which is a second assistant cameraman. I worked on films, commercials, music videos, all sorts of things. So I was not a photographer. At the time, the 7D and the 5D Mark II were revolutionizing the indie filmmaker market. Rather than having to spend thousands, if not tens of thousands on Reds or Arris, you could get a relatively cheap, in comparison, DSLR and get pretty good footage. I've never loved DSLR footage when you compare it to big cameras like a Red or an Arri, kind of understandable, but it was very good and a lot of people were using them. So I jumped on the bandwagon. I got a 7D, that was what I could afford at the time, and I used it for video. I didn't really take many photos with it. Same thing with the 5D Mark II. I eventually upgraded to a 5D Mark II for the video purposes. I was not using it to take photos. I do use Canon very regularly. I shoot in lots of different studios, and I use, they almost always have Canon, and I use 5D Mark IIs still on a regular basis. 5D Mark III, Mark IVs, 5DS, 5DSRs, all of them. I shoot a lot of Canon. But moving forward, I then got out of the film industry, started getting into photography, and I was mainly doing portraits and wildlife. I wanted to upgrade my body, but I think at the time it was the 5D Mark III that was out, and that was so expensive in comparison to Nikon's D750. And on paper, it seemed as though the D750 had more of the specifications and features that I wanted. Better high ISO performance, better focusing system, at least than the Mark II, and it was cheaper than the Mark III. By selling all of my Canon gear, I could go over to Nikon and get the features that I wanted. So I chose the Canon system for the features, I then chose the Nikon system for the features, and hopefully you can see as a recurring theme here, I've now switched to Sony, and I've done that because of the features. So it's kind of funny, I've done sort of a whole circle. I've now gone back to shooting some video. I shoot video for you guys on a regular basis, and on occasion I have clients who also want me to shoot video. I didn't like the idea of having two systems, so of keeping my Nikon equipment, which was a D750 and a D810 and all my lenses. I didn't like the idea of keeping that and running a second system just for video. That actually worked out as more expensive than me switching to Sony. I've also been looking at Sony for years and really loving what they've been doing. And with the new iteration of the A7R III and the A7 III, I thought they looked good enough. So I've now bought an A7R II, which is my backup camera, and an A7R III, which I'm recording on right now. I bought a 90mm macro lens, 16-35mm f4, which I'm filming this on now, and a 55mm, sorry, f1.8. So that's what I've got on the Sony side of things. I've never really understood brand loyalty. For me, a camera is a tool just like a C-stand or a light or anything else I have in the studio. If there is a tool that I can get which is going to help me do my job better, more easily, then I don't care who makes it. I don't care if it's Phase 1, Hasselblad, Fuji, Canon, Sony, Nikon. It does not matter to me. It's whatever's going to make my life easier inside the studio. Now, at the same time, I completely understand that you're going to want to get what's most appropriate for you, what's going to be the most value for money in terms of spending your money. I'm not sitting here saying you can get absolutely any brand and it will be suitable for you. Yeah, these days, almost any brand you can buy and you'll be able to create amazing photos from them. And in fact, you will be able to create amazing photos from any brand. You can do it with a camera phone if you want to. But I am a firm believer that gear does matter, and you need to really think about the features that you require to help inform your decision about what you should get. So I needed good video for this sort of stuff, YouTube stuff, and good video for my clients. I also needed a camera with the image quality that I can get from a high-end Canon or a high-end Nikon, and even bordering on phase one. I know there are photographers who say that some of these, the newer A7R III body and the decent lenses like the 90mm macro, the one I have just here, love this lens, they say that that is comparable to phase one bodies that they use, and I think that's amazing. I've never done a comparison myself, but that's pretty amazing. So that's why I switched to Sony. It was all about features, and yeah, let's move on. I'm not going to pretend like I wasn't nervous every time I've switched camera brands, and to be honest, switching to Sony, I was probably the most nervous. I think whenever you're selling all of your cameras and lenses and moving to a different brand, you're going to be a little bit worried that you're not going to have made the right decision and lose a bunch of money switching back. But yeah, I was nervous the most about Sony because it's quite polarized when you talk to people about it. I always talk to fellow photographers when I'm making this sort of decision. I spoke to quite a few about this one. And yeah, the opinions were very polarized. Most people said that they'd either used or heard very good things about Sony, and if they'd used the cameras, they really liked them. But there was a couple people who were really passionately adamant that Sony were not studio cameras and they would not be good enough for my needs, that they weren't reliable enough and all these other things. Thankfully, that isn't what I found, but my main reservations were about lenses and then studio capability. So lenses, I haven't really talked about too much until now, but lenses are such an important thing to consider when you're deciding on the camera system you're going to get. Camera bodies will evolve over time and change, they'll bring out new ones, and yeah, lenses do as well, but that's far less regular. For me, if I was to have an amazing camera body, but the lens ecosystem wasn't there, then that camera body is pretty useless to me. With Sony, I compared all the lenses that I was going to use regularly with the ones that I use on Nikon and on Canon, and I was very pleased with what I saw. On all the tests online, it seemed as though things like sharpness, chromatic aberrations, the t-stop that you'd get, all these things seemed to be better for Sony. Obviously, it kind of depended lens for lens, but generally speaking, the Sony lenses are actually really good. So that really helped me make my decision to switch over to Sony a little bit easier. I wasn't concerned about that lens as part of it. The second reservation was the capability as a studio camera. So tethering reliability, like I said, I'd heard bad things. I haven't found that. It's been absolutely fine for me. I've tested it in multiple studios, tested it at home, it's all been good. For me also, I use live view a lot. So it was important that the live view in Capture One, which is the software I use for capturing images, was good. And it is, but there's kind of a caveat. So inside Capture One, you can use the live view, but you can't change the focus or zoom in. Thankfully, Sony has its own software which you can use simultaneously with Capture One that allows you to do those controls. So you can focus, you can zoom in, you can do all the stuff that you would have in Capture One, and you can use it simultaneously, so it doesn't really interrupt my workflow. So thankfully, all of my reservations were answered, and it was perfectly fine for me to switch over to Sony. This is not a review of Sony cameras, but I know you guys are going to ask about my initial impressions, so I'll give them to you now. I've only been using the cameras, like I said, for a month or so, but I have used them in a few environments, so I'll tell you what I like and don't like so far. I've written notes so I don't forget anything. I tend to forget stuff, so I'll just run through these quickly. So number one, the image quality is there. Compared to the Canon cameras that I use on a regular basis, compared to my old Nikon D810 and D750, the image quality is as good as, if not better. So that's great. Lenses, all the ones I use, I really like. I did have kind of a bit of a funny moment when I realized that all of the lenses, at least the ones that I have, and I think most of the lenses of Sony, are focused by wire. So what that means is that if you're used to Canon or Nikon lenses or cinema lenses, for instance, you turn them and they'll have a hard stop at either end and a specific amount that they turn. So say that might be, let's say 180 degrees. You go from here, that's close focus, to there, and that's infinity. And it's always the same amount of turn. That means that you can, if you're doing videos, for instance, you can use a focus puller, and you can make marks and know exactly, like if I turn it this much, that'll be in focus or whatever. It doesn't really matter that much for me. I can't think of too many scenarios that would matter for most people except for videography, or if you manually focus a lot. But having said that, I've actually really started to enjoy the manual focus on Sony's because their system is focused by wire. I've got to admit, I'm quite technical when it comes to equipment, but when it comes to the mechanics of lenses and cameras, that's where I shut off and I don't really care. So sorry if I'm getting any of that kind of stuff wrong, but the information will be correct for the most part. So the lenses are focused by wire, and what that means for most of these lenses is that there is no specific amount of focus throw. So you're not going 180 degrees from close focus to infinity. If you turn the lens really quickly, turn the focus really quickly, then you'll go through the range extremely quickly. If you turn it really slowly, then you could take a very, very long time to go from close focus to infinity. So when I'm manually focusing on something, I can turn it quite quickly to get roughly in the ballpark. And then when I start turning it really slowly, I can really fine tune that focus because the throw kind of increases. It's quite weird, and anybody who's more technical than me will understand it and probably be able to explain, and please do so in the comments. But it's actually quite nice. So other things, adapting the Nikon lenses, don't bother. If you use Canon, then it's quite good, and from what I hear, they adapt quite well. But Nikon, you only have manual focus, and I just didn't really find the adapters that I use were that great. I really love the EVF. I like the what you see is what you get thing. When I'm not shooting in the studio, when I am shooting in the studio, I can turn that off. I think it's great. I love focus peaking. That's when you turn the focus and you can set a color to show you what's in focus. Really helpful for manually focusing. Love that. Customizability, which I'm not even sure if it was a word. I typed this when I was typing this out on Word. It allowed me to use it, and I even Googled whether customizability was a word, and there seemed to be some debate about whether it was. But anyway, customizability. I like the customizability of the A7R III. You can change pretty much any button to being what you want it to be, and that's fantastic. So there's so many options inside the menus. They really feel like the Sony cameras compared to Nikon and Canon really feel like a technological advancement. You know, when you pick them up and you start using them and you go through the menus and you see all the features they have, it really feels like they're a few steps ahead of those bodies. I can't speak for the 850 because I've not used that, but all the Canon bodies and everything else, it just feels like they're so far ahead, and it's so great that you can customize all the buttons to take advantage of all those features. I don't love using a separate app for live view while in Capture One. I did already mention it's not the end of the world, and it isn't the end of the world, but I prefer it if you could just do it all in Capture One, but it doesn't really matter. It's not a big criticism. This one threw me for a little bit. So when you change batteries on a Sony camera, I think it's because of the implementation of the focusing system in the lenses, you lose the focus position. So let's say I'm focusing on, you know, this keyboard here. I'm the camera, I'm focusing on this keyboard, and I'm doing some big still life shoot and spending hours and hours photographing this keyboard. I've focused there, I'm in manual focus, I change batteries, and then the focus is lost. The focus position changes, completely loses its position. That's pretty annoying. If I'm doing some kind of thing which is taking hours and hours to take a single photo, and I don't want the focus to move when I change batteries, then that is kind of annoying. But there's a workaround for it. You can get an AC adapter, which you can get for most camera systems. You put this kind of dummy battery in the battery slot, and then you can plug it into mains power, and then the camera will never lose power. So if I'm in that sort of situation, I can do that. It's not the end of the world, but it is a little bit annoying. That kind of scenario doesn't come across all that much, but I prefer if it didn't happen. But like I said, it's not the end of the world. And I think, oh no, sorry, there is another one. Size. So you can't really tell here, but I'm actually 6'2". I have very big hands, and the Sony cameras, they're small. They are small. As a studio photographer, it doesn't bother me that much because most of the time it's just on a tripod, but I would understand if I was walking around all day doing portraits with it, it could be quite annoying. I think if you get the battery grip, it might be all right. I've not tried that, but I imagine that will be a lot better. And I know you can get these funny little contraptions to go underneath the cameras that make them feel a bit bigger, or that kind of seems to defeat the point for me. So I don't know. But yeah, size is a little bit of an issue. But all in all, my initial impressions are fantastic. I really love, especially the A7R III. I think the A7R II had these limitations which you'll hear in a lot of reviews. So like battery life, focusing system, that sort of stuff. All of those things were ironed out with the A7R III, including like a USB-C port, so that because they're pretty big files. When you're tethering to your computer, having that makes tethering so much quicker. All these little niggles that bothered me when I tried the A7R II are completely fixed in the A7R III, and I really, really love that camera. If you're a studio photographer like me and you also want to take great video, then the Sony cameras are fantastic. If you're a studio photographer like me and you don't care about video, then the Canon cameras are great, the Nikon ones are great, Sony is still great even if you don't care about the video functionality, and so are so many other camera brands. You know, obviously Phase 1, Hasselblad, all the medium format ones, Fuji, Panasonic. I've not used either of those two in the studio, but I'm sure you can take decent photos with them. Really, you can take great photos with all these different kind of camera brands, but you really just need to think about the features that you need. Obviously, like I've said in this video, for me, there's the image quality, everything else in the video. That's why I chose Sony. But if you're trying to think of the right camera brand for you, just think about the features that you require for your type of photography, whether that's studio-based or outside doing portraits or sport or whatever it is. Think about the features that you need, and that is what you should use to inform your decision about what camera that you want. Now, if you liked this video today, please hit subscribe. This was a little bit different to my usual kind of video, but I am going to do a few more gear type videos as the months roll on when I get time to make a video. If you liked it, hit the thumbs up button. If you have any questions, chuck them down in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all later.